The wildest thing that ever happened to me as an insurance professional. So I was starting my career at a captive for the first 3 years. At one point, I had a customer come in. Now, back then, if they didn't have prior insurance, we had to submit it to underwriting for underwriting to approve, and then we could issue the quote. And it took 7 to 10 days. I had a customer come into the office, sit down, big, intimidating fella. He said, "Hi, how can I help you?" He said, "I'm going to have insurance today." I said, "Okay, no problem." Ran his report, pulled it up, saw he didn't have prior insurance, explained to him the process. I said, "Okay, Mr. Client, here's what happens. We gather your info, we submit it to underwriting, and in about 2 or 3 days, they come back." He crossed his arms, put both arms on the desk, and said, "I think you misunderstood me. I'm going to have an insurance policy today." So in natural form, I ran his motor vehicle record, in and out of jail, drug possession, cocaine charges, attempted assault with a weapon. Needless to say, he walked out of the office with a proof of insurance that day. And then I called the carrier and said, "Sorry, I bound this policy. I didn't think I had an option."
What did they say?
They said no problem, and then they deleted the policy they pulled it out of the queue, so it never got issued. I was a little scared, but I never saw the guy again, so it all worked out.
Oh, a happy ending to an even happier story.
Yeah.
Wow.
It was wild. So my name is Joel. I'm with Coachlight Insurance Agency in Grand Rapids, Michigan, and I'm an insurance dude.
Insurance dudes are on a mission to escape being handcuffed by our agencies.
How? By uncovering the secrets to creating a predictable, consistent, and profitable agency sales machine.
I am Craig Pretzinger.
I am Jason Feldman.
We are agents.
We are insurance dudes.
Right now, while it's fresh in your mind, check out live.teledudes.com.
We took our notes from over 100 interviews with top agents from around the country and made it into a live webcast.
Using these strategies led Craig and I to selling more than $10 million in premium in the last 2 years.
On this call, you'll receive the exact blueprint to get the same results.
Just go to live.teledudes.com to register for this upcoming Tuesday's live call with us.
If you jump on this call with us, we're certain 2022 will be an absolutely fantastic year for you.
See you there.
Bada
Boom!
Boom! What? You know that's the
is
international sign for touchdown, Mr. Jason.
What's a touchdown?
Right.
Is that foosball?
It's
when they knock over
foosball.
the wickets with the cricket ball.
Yeah.
Ooh. He knows that. Oh, I thought you were talking Harry Potter.
No.
Oh, yeah.
You're talking cricket.
Cricket. International.
So, Joel,
baseball.
I want to know, and I don't know this story. So, because I know you, but I don't know this story. So take us through young Joel and how Joel became an insurance dude.
Oh, man. Well, growing up, I was always interested in financial advising and then also all things science and math based. So when I first went to college, I ended up going for chemistry. Absolutely hated it. Way too much lab work, too much time, with the beakers. And I'd look around for people to talk to in the lab and everyone's, head down, pouring their own beakers. So I said,
but you got a cool coat.
I did.
Yeah.
So I ended up deciding that's not what I wanted to do. I went to a small liberal arts school though, so they didn't have a financial advising program, but they did have an insurance program, which is very close to financial advising, obviously. It's actually Olivet College, one of the top ranked programs in the country. So transferred over to insurance, got started working for a large captive agency, and then after 3 years went independent and was working as a commercial broker for a few other agencies, and then decided there's got to be a better way to do this. So I went in business for myself and started pursuing what is that better way to take care of customers and also provide for staff.
Awesome.
Love it. So what captive carrier was it? If they have hands and they're blue, you can't say the name because they won't let us.
State Farm.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
It's red.
Yeah. So I started at State Farm for the first 3 years as an intern, and then also as a producer with the hope of going to Bloomington someday. That's where that story happened. That guy leaned across the desk, and it was it was quite an experience, but it was pretty hard. The carrier that I was with essentially jacked rates up really high. We had a huge increase, and I didn't really know what to do, and customers were coming in giving me a hard time about it. So I talked to some of my college friends, and they said, well, we're independent. So if that happens with carrier A, we just move them over to carrier B. So that's really ignited there's got to be a better way to do this, and my full pursuit of that journey and path.
I want to unpack this a little bit more because I think there's a lot of captive carriers out there that feel hopeless. What was that transition like? Well, how big was the book at Farmers?
Well, it was at State Farm. I was a producer.
State Farmers.
I wasn't the.
That's what I meant.
Yeah.
All states farmers.
Such and such farm. Yeah. I wasn't the agent. So when I left, it wasn't, I didn't have to do a buyout or any of that. I was a producer because I was still in college at the time, but we were still responsible for servicing and all that kind of stuff. When I did open my shop, I left like a $1.5 million book behind to do it and basically start scratch. So as far as the process, I mean, it's basically the same as any other process that it's scary, it's intimidating, but the question is the juice worth the squeeze, right? So there's a lot of times that, you're hanging out on the branch by yourself, but also, you get to choose how much water that branch gets. You get to choose how much sunlight it gets. You get to choose where that branch is planted. And so some people would look at that and say, hey, that's terrifying. I'm dangling out on my own. Some people would look at that and say, I know just the soil to plant this tree in. I know just the right amount of water to give this tree. And I think if you're in that situation, it's a perfect opportunity to believe in yourself, invest in yourself for the long-term advantage.
Yeah.
I love it. This agent gave me advice when I took over my agency, and he said, if you ever want to leave the captive world, he said, just do it. Just do it and don't look back. He was in the same situation with the same captive carrier that I was with, and he was absolutely dominating, and because he went indie. But I think a lot of time, the reason why I bring this up, because there's a lot of agents that complain about being captive, and I think that at one point there was a bunch of leverage with captives because of marketing and the tools that you have. And now seeing all the tools and what you can do on marketing, I think the playing field is pretty even. So I think there's a lot of agents out there that maybe they should. If you're showing up to work every day and you're not happy and you can't sell anything, then maybe you should just switch over and so you own your clients,
Yeah.
I think that it's also important to ask, why am I not happy? Right? Because it could potentially be that it's not a fit to be over here where my hands are tied, where some folks would say that your hands are tied and that this other opportunity would be better. But also, if the ethic isn't there or the understanding of their funnel or there could be some fundamental differences that even going over there, the grass may not be greener. So it's not some quick decision, but there could be opportunity, right?
I would agree. The expression I like to use, which I think I actually stole from a song, but the grass isn't always green on the other side. It's green where you water it, right?
Yeah.
And so one of the things that I've tried to learn and continue to be careful about in my life is, hey, there's probably opportunities that I'm missing right now because I'm waiting to get to some other spot before I'm going to capitalize on some other opportunity. And so there's opportunities now that I'm missing by focusing on the future too far out. And I think every side has its advantages and disadvantages. One of the things I did was buy a guy, and I always mix up his last name, Patrick Bet David or Patrick David Bet or whatever. He's got this thing, it's called the Ultimate Questionnaire. And it's like 20 pages. It goes into all these questions about your past and who you are and blah, 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 and what really drives you. I would suggest anybody that's thinking about it to dig into something like that and really try to get a chunk and an understanding of, who am I? What am I unhappy about? And is this really going to change it, or is it the same thing, right? Because frustrations with carriers and that type of thing on the captive side certainly feels insurmountable because it's one carrier and you're like, dude, if only you understood what you're putting me through. But it's not as though we're free from that just because we have several options, right? So in a bad year where, let's say, rates are high or inflation's high and costs to rebuild homes are high, right? I know that never happened in the insurance world. renewals are coming in high. Instead of one carrier giving us a hard time, we now have 10 carriers saying, hey, we noticed production numbers are low. We need something from you. The other thing we have to worry about on the independent side that's different from the captive environment is carriers will pull contracts. If you're an agent with a captive company, you don't necessarily have to worry about State Farm or Farm Bureau or AAA or American Family coming to you and saying, hey, Craig, you didn't produce enough this year, man. You can't write our product anymore. But that's a concern of ours on the independent side. You didn't produce enough. Your clients had too many losses. This claim didn't quite go the right way. So we're not interested in working with you anymore.
Yeah. Everything goes in seasons, right? And so if you're in that winter season right now, I think it's important to identify why we're in that winter season. Is it industry related? Is it geographic? Is it carrier related? Because it's easy to want to eject from something when it's uncomfortable, but it may just be uncomfortable because that's the spot that it's in right now, and it's going to get back out of it. One of you just said, like, waiting. I think it was you, Joel. A lot of people will wait in order to get to the place that then I'm going to do the thing. And what I found, and I think Jason too, and also you, Joel, is like waiting is the one thing I'm certain that will prevent me from getting results, right? It's like we're going to mess up no matter what we do. And the quicker we can get through that mess up, instead of waiting 4 weeks to mess up, we want to just get action happening. And,
yeah, absolutely.
Like we were talking on the call right now with a new person on the coaching call, right? They came on and she said, okay, well, I'm going to get started, but I'm waiting until the beginning of the year. And it's like, well, what are we waiting for? Right? Why would you wait until the beginning of the year? Because you're still going to be just as confused and lost at the beginning of the year as you are now. We just got to go. You got to go.
Yeah. One thing I've learned for sure is the idea that, hey, if I gather, and I think this comes from the chemistry side, if I gather all this information and all this training, and I can kind of design what I think is going to happen and kind of put a nice little bow on it, and then we roll it out, right? And stamp my name on it, we roll it out. And we expect to have this big launch and everything to be a success. That's not how it works, right? And so even when you do wait, and I've made this mistake, even when you do wait until something's perfect and roll it out, you find out it was actually far from perfect because the way it works in practice is far from the way that it works in theory. And so you're almost better off to say, here's a rough outline. I'm just going to go ahead and shotgun it and build the plane while I'm flying it, which is terrifying, but you're doing that either way. It's just one way you think you are, the other way you think you're not. And I think in the way where you think you've already built the plane and now you're going to fly, you're going to take off the runway. And I think that instills even more panic because you're like, oh crap, I thought I built this plane and I had my parachute and now there's a hole in my parachute. What am I going to do?
Yeah.
So I think you're better off just to get in the plane and let's go. Let's see how this sucker flies, and whatever direction the plane takes, we'll try to guide it and learn and figure out how the plane operates.
Yeah. One of the most powerful skills is to just remain emotionally neutral on a lot of it, right? And just, okay, it's information, right? Like I know where I need to go and I know whatever tool I've chosen to get there. Now it's just go. We just got to go.
Right. And I think it comes down to psychology. All of the books and all of the things all say, get rid of your own limiting beliefs, right? So we try to work with prospects, have them get rid of their own limiting buying beliefs, but we as agency owners still have them too. And what's one of those limiting beliefs as far as getting something new and having to have it perfect? What we think is we don't have the skills needed to solve a problem that might develop while we're in pursuit of rolling a new thing out. So I would say that's the limiting belief and why people don't just hop into something. They don't give themselves enough credit that, hey, if a problem comes up, I'm smart enough and I have the skills and resources needed that I can go through and I can sort this thing out and it's going to be okay.
So what kind of skills and resources should somebody have to navigate that?
I think humility is a big one. Be willing to basically put your ego aside and who cares how I look at the end of this? Let's keep it about the clients and let's keep it about the staff. So like, for example, in the intro, I said, I'm with Coach Light Insurance Agency. It's not the Joel agency, right? Like I intentionally left my name off of it to remind myself every day when I come in that it's not about me. It's about the client and about the employees. So I think that's the first thing. And I think with humility comes willingness to listen and ask questions. Allow yourself to fail. Hey, we tried that. It didn't work. I'm human too. Let's go back and let's, try it this other way. And I think, between those two things and also reaching out and asking for help.
Right.
I think those are really the three things which I think are tougher as you kind of climb up the ladder, right? Like producers kind of have a little bit of an ego, and then agency owners kind of have a little bit of an ego, and then agency owners that have deemed themselves successful or have a big staff. It just seems to create this monster ego. But if you can drop the ego, be willing to truly listen, not just hear feedback from people, and know who to ask help to, I think you can crush any obstacle.
Right. And as
Love
you
that.
ask those questions, actually listen, like listen to the answer and use that answer. It seems like it can happen more often than not where somebody asks the question and then the answer that will give out based on experience and data is this, and then they don't like that answer. So then they just keep asking the same question differently. And it's like, no, if you want it a certain way, that's fine. Do it that way. And you're going to learn that that isn't the way that it works. But if you're going to ask, you have to be willing to, oh, okay. It's not just a sounding board to answer shop and hope that what I want is going to be reaffirmed, right? You have to be ready for that alternative answer and then be able to execute.
Yeah. And sometimes it's reaffirmed, and that's great. But that seldom is the case. I think you learn more from your failures and people saying, no, that's not right. Do it this way instead. You learn way more from your failures
100%.
than when I come to the elite group and I say, hey, here's what I'm thinking about. What do you think? And everybody goes, yep, that's what we do. Right. I haven't learned anything. I haven't learned a different perspective, which is okay. Right. I'm happy to do what works. But part of it is the pursuit of knowledge and understanding. And once you truly understand something, that's when you can start to game the system and tweak things for your advantage.
What is the saying? The successful person has failed more times than the unsuccessful person has attempted to take on, right?
Yeah.
Like that perfectionist thing is I think is an excuse to just not get going. Yeah. Can you pinpoint a big win in the beginning, whether it was at State Farm when you were a producer or sometime between now and then that was like a big win and you're like, oh man, I love this?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the big wins I had, so I always developed my own process. One of the things in my process was wanting to spend some actual time with the customer explaining their coverages to them. And I got a lot of feedback contrary to that saying, Joel, what are you doing? Why don't you email them their quote? They'll call you back with questions, whatever. Be nice to them on the phone and move on. Because while you're making more dials, you'll be able to get a couple more leads rather than this one lead. And two things happened by following my own process and kind of bucking the just email a quote out idea. The first one is that I had people that were in their 50s telling me, so they've been buying insurance for a while. They're telling me, oh my goodness, thank you so much. We were in harm's way. No one's ever taken the time to explain this to us before, right? And you're talking people that are getting ready to retire that have $50,000 bodily injury limits on their auto insurance.
Right.
And I'm going into a situation where I'm selling them a $2 million umbrella.
Yeah.
Because that's what they need. They have that much net worth. The second thing that was really a big win where it was like, ding, ding, different is better than what everybody else does, is when I tracked it the first 6 months that I opened my agency, and this was true before, but the first 6 months that I opened my agency, the average customer that we wrote that I spent that time with sent us 3 referrals during the second 6-month period that we were open.
Wow.
So not only were we
The average?
The average, yes.
Wow.
Yeah. So not only were we taking care of people better than they ever had before, but I was getting more opportunities than those agents that said, screw the customer, just send out the email, and then you can probably get 2 more leads when you cold call. Because the referrals that I got closed a way higher percentage of the time than some random cold calls that I would have made. And that's assuming that you could get 2 more clients making outbound dials by yourself in a 25-minute time period, aka not going to happen.
Right. So what was your strategy to get those referrals? What did you say, or did it just happen organically?
For the most part, it happened organically. I think unconsciously people know. So they could tell that I really cared about them and wanted to put them first. Surprisingly, most of our referrals came from people whose business I turned down. So I would get their current deck pages and compare it against what I could do. And there were a handful of people that I said, look, I shopped you with these 10 carriers. I can't compete. So my rule is if I'm 10% or more than, so if they pay $1 now, if my quote is $1.20, $1.15 or higher, I don't push for the sale because I think that's jerky and truly I can only bring so much value to the table. And so if I'm more than 15% higher, I don't push for it. And so I think the people where I wasn't competitive, I said, hey, you know what? I really care for you. Let me walk you through what I would do the same as I would someone we were writing. Here's exactly what I would do. call your agent and just make these changes to your current policy. Those people made the referrals rain. And so I don't know that I could just stand here and pinpoint something without thinking about it, because I think it was unconscious things like that that came out from my number one priority being the person that I'm talking to and ensuring them as though they're a family member.
Well, approaching it that way, I think, creates a tremendous amount of goodwill and trust, right? Because they're like, oh man, he didn't even try to sell me. Because people don't want to be sold, but they do love to buy, right? They love to buy things, but they don't want somebody convincing them of it. So you disarmed all of that by saying, hey, look, you're in a good spot, which unlocked those other three, right? So
Correct.
It's pretty awesome. And that's not going to work in every venue. Like in the captive model, you don't have that luxury. You can't say, oh, it's better to push a little bit more, because we don't have that option to go through 10 different ones. So it is interesting how there's so many different ways to do it.
I was thinking about it while you were talking. Another way that I approached the conversation that helped was I would tell them, my job is to educate you. It's your job to make the decision on what's best for your family. So I would tell them all about, hey, if this situation happens, you'll be covered on my policy and not on your current policy. If this situation happens, this is how I would want a policy to respond. This is how your current policy is set to respond. And then I always turn it around and say, but this policy doesn't protect me. Every single one of these line items is customizable. You tell me, Jason, what's right for your family? Which way would you want your family protected? So I always educated them and kind of put that spin on it, I guess, so to speak, of, hey, here's kind of how this coverage would pay out. But also, if you don't want that, I can redo it. So you tell me what's right for your family.
I love it.
And a lot of times they would sell the policy themselves.
Right.
Because
you want them to tell you. Yeah.
Yeah, they weren't buying my quote. They were buying their quote. They're the ones that did the quote and chose the coverage limits and the protection for their family. So I wasn't competing against State Farm or Farm Bureau or whoever or AAA. They were building their own quote.
Love that.
But
So true.
I also think it's important to make a distinction here, which I will, is that there's this big myth out there called consultative selling, where if you just come along the person and consult with them, you never have to ask for the sale. That's crap.
Yeah.
You still, when there were times that I was better and I knew it and they admitted it and I told them it was time to buy. There's no such thing as consultative selling. You have to be willing to ask for the sale once you've earned it. Have enough respect for yourself and value yourself enough that you ask for the sale when you've earned it.
Love that. I love how you've gone real deep with the clients and you put them first, in which it obviously has paid back with referrals and all kinds of stuff. So with that kind of care, I'm sure you take that kind of care and put that into your team as well. So can we talk a little bit about your team and what you're doing to recruit?
Yeah, we can. That's one of those areas where I'm currently flying the plane while I build it. So,
perfect.
Yeah. and trusting myself to solve the issues that come up. So I might not have all the answers, but typically what I do is throw something on, Indeed or a job posting website like that. Make a compelling argument about, so again, the goal is to be different. So every other job you look at on Indeed or whatever says, here's a salary range with no indication of exactly how you're going to get there, right? So what's salary, what's commission, what's whatever. The way that they describe your pay is competitive salary, great benefits. It's like, okay, that doesn't tell me how I get to $80,000 a year in annual pay. So try to be different. List out, here's the salary, here's the commission. And then I also think what's real countercultural right now, what is a chief welcome client experience advisor? Nobody knows. So don't make that the title for your position. Make the title for your position home, auto, sales, insurance sales. Make it real clear. And then list out, you're expected to do 4 hours of talk time every day, 150 outbound calls, be able to do at least 5 quotes a day. List it out. Make it clear what they're applying for and how they're getting compensated.
It's message to market, right? We got to match what we want with the person whom we want to attract.
Correct. And I think it saves time on the back end when you do that, because on the back end, you get somebody that's like, well, I need 50 grand salary. Okay, how many interviews did you do with that person, wasting your own time just to find that out in the end?
Yeah.
So there's kind of two ideas. One is the agent with the scarcity mindset of, oh no, there's not enough quotes to do, I better be careful with every quote. Well, that's also in the hiring too, right? Like, oh no, there's only so many candidates out here, like I better be careful not to scare them away. But in both cases, you're getting to the end and you don't have a deal. So find people that are viable solutions to the problem that you're trying to solve, whether it's clients or employees, and then walk through the process with them to find out who's the best fit. Wean them out up front, focus on your good prospects in the middle, and go from there.
Yeah, that hiring piece is something that it's underestimated how much has to go into that and for how long, right? I guess it is another funnel, right? It's another pipeline that has to be filled because you're never going to find the perfect person at the moment that you need them.
Right.
Just not going to happen. That's like, having the sniper rifle and aiming at Alaska and hoping that you hit Alaska.
Yeah.
And you're not going to. We have to make sure that we're always recruiting. Like that's one of those things. It can be tough. And it's easy to let go, right? It's easy to not do.
And the other important thing to remember is that even once you hire them, they're a week or two of learning agency processes. And then plus their first, let's say 80 quotes, right? 80 plus then return phone calls before you're getting a return on investment. So if you wait until you need somebody, you're talking 4, 8, 12 weeks minimum to walk through that process to where you actually have somebody that can fill those shoes.
Right. And you bring on the wrong person, which happens, right? They don't work out. If you get 8 weeks in and it's finally, oh no, this isn't the right person, then you're starting all over again.
Yeah. Yeah. Now you're at 20 weeks.
Recruiting.
Yeah. Yeah. Now you're at 20 weeks of just training. And by the way, there's only 26 weeks in half a year.
So what do you do on the front end when you bring them on? Then what? To make sure that scenario that I just painted is less likely to happen?
I do. So once we get them on, I do a personality test. It's one of the first things that we do as part of the interview or I should say for 90% of candidates is one of the first things that we do. And then we get on the phone as soon as possible at our office. I know a lot of places will kind of do some training first or tiptoe around it. But I think the issue is that you get people that are enamored with learning. Right? They love to learn the process, and maybe doing the process is kind of secondary, which is okay, but that's not what we're looking for. We're looking for the real drivers in the agency. So I try to get them on the phone as soon as possible. Our last hire, she was on the phone day 1, day 2, she was her first full day on the telephone. And then we would train with active quotes, right? So get on the phone, get a quote, hang up. I'll walk you through how to quote it in the carrier system. Because I think you learn better when there's fire on your feet, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You walk a little quicker when you're walking on coals than when you're hanging out in the swimming pool.
Yeah.
So I say, hey, let's get on those coals. You're going to be overwhelmed, but that'll make you grateful on the back end. So let's take a deep breath. I got your hand. Let's walk through these coals together. Meanwhile, we're also doing coaching and teaching. So we're doing 2 trainings every day. We're doing once a week 1-to-1s after they hit the 60 quote mark. All of these things lead to success and gives me an opportunity to say, hey, I know it's a little uncomfortable sometimes. Hey, I know it's really high volume. Here's why, though. You're not going to be able to make $100,000 a year somewhere else where you have to make all the outbound dials and find all your prospects and do all. It's just not possible. So we have to have a little bit of short-term discomfort so that we can have a really huge long-term gain.
Right. And it's like this whole thing of shifting their mind to being comfortable with being uncomfortable, right? And so you get them uncomfortable, get them used to being uncomfortable, and then they get comfortable with that thing. And now you can just move them, keep moving up, keep them in this little area of a little bit of discomfort where they can handle it, but they keep getting better. And that, for me, I think it's one of the most rewarding things is taking somebody who knows nothing about sales or insurance and then like seeing them progress to the point where they're getting really good results. It's really cool because you see how it's impacted them, right? They share stories with you how, I started using some of this stuff at home and it actually works there too. I mean, it's really cool. Yeah.
My kid cleaned their room. You wouldn't believe it. I overcame 3 objections.
Right.
And they said, okay.
Instead of yelling, I actually just used these tools that,
Yeah. I don't have time right now. Well, if you had time right now, don't you think you should clean your room?
But if you did have time.
Yeah.
Love it. What are some tips that you would say is the most effective that you've used in the last, let's say, year that like prior you weren't using? Some of the ahas that you might have had recently within your agency.
Whether it goes right or whether it goes wrong, it's my fault.
Oh, big one.
Did you read a certain book that inspired that?
I started listening to an Entre Leadership podcast that talked about that quite a bit. Yeah, it said, as I started bringing on staff, I just started getting more into leadership. And, a lot of times it's, it's easy to squeak out of, right? And I think it's that high ego we were talking about earlier that helps us kind of squeak out of response. Well, but they didn't do such and such. It's like, okay, but who's responsible for the training for that task? Or who's responsible for the system that caused whatever, right? So whether it goes right or whether it goes wrong, it's my fault.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. One of the books that I thought a lot about that a few years back, and one of the books that I read was the Extreme Ownership, and it was I love that. And, yeah, it's so true though. Like what it does, at least what it did for me in the thought process, is be able to take ownership of everything, and then it like empowers you and gives less power to everything else, right? It's like, you show up in a certain place, you get hit by a ball. It's like, well, maybe I shouldn't have showed up at that place, instead of yelling at the guy that hit me with the ball or whatever. But
I think the other thing that's been a really big advantage to me is getting in a group of like-minded agents. The reality
100%.
is on the independent side, the average agency grows at 5%.
Oh,
I think it's those numbers. I didn't look at the best practice study recently, but maybe it's 10%. Someone could call or listen to this podcast and say, no, it's 10.
I think it's
no,
less on the
15.
captive side.
Either way, I would argue that's embarrassingly low. Inflation
Right.
this year is 12%. So if you're growing at less than 12%, you're losing, man. And so getting in a group of the teledudes, obviously, getting in a group of like-minded agents, is it always about the system and the dials and the quotes and the leads? No, the conversations aren't always about that. Now, that's a bulk of it. That's what we talk about. But really, it's, hey, we're all in this together. We all want high growth. How do we drive that? How do we buck the system of, yes, you go to whatever meeting, carrier meeting, or you go to whatever national convention, and they're giving you tricks and tips on how to get to 10% growth instead of 5% growth. And it's like, ooh, right?
Yeah.
No. So like being in a group of like, hey, let's filter that crap out. And when we're actually going to have a growth meeting, we're talking about 20, 30, 40% growth year over year. It's a big difference, especially if you're trying to leave a legacy and provide for employees and, future family members and kids and all that kind of stuff. I think that's something that's oftentimes missed by other members in the Teledudes group, is it's the value of the community.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, what are you still doing here?
Well, while you're still here and while it's fresh in your mind, check out live.teledudes.com.
Yeah, if you weren't listening before, we took notes from over 100 interviews with top agents from around the country and made it into a live webcast.
Using these strategies did help Craig and I write over $10 million in premium in the last couple years.
And let me tell you, on this call, you'll receive the exact blueprint to get the very same results.
Again, that's live.teledudes.com to register for this upcoming Tuesday's live call with us.
And if you jump on with us, we are certain 2022 will be an absolutely fantastic year for you.
See you there.